Welcome back to day 4 of the early May sowings, my little mini series that I've been putting out for this week. I've had so much to get done, I just thought I would try and film as much as I can over a day or two to put out for this week instead of one long video. So today we are talking about melons. Now, melons can be grown successfully here in the UK. If you're really lucky, you may be able to grow them outside, but in general, here in the UK, it is a polytunnel or a greenhouse job. Now, they do not like the cold weather, and it is very similar to chilies and tomatoes, where anything drops below 10 degrees, it can sulk or not be very happy, and any frosts could end up killing them. Now, I've gone past my last frost day and the weather for the next couple of weeks seems to be suitable to start sowing these. Now, normally I will start my melons a little bit earlier and have them indoors under a light. Melons take a lot longer to mature, to get the fruit to ripen, than say a cucumber or a courgette. So the earlier you can actually get them sown, it's actually better for them. But obviously you've got to have the right conditions, the right light or the right warmth. Now, it can be quite hard to get that in the house. So this year, as you're aware, my home is full of chili plants and it's taken all the grow lights that I have. So this year I will be growing, I think it is 4 different types of melon in my new polytunnel. Now, last year I grew in the greenhouse and it was quite successful. It wasn't too bad until the end when I started getting spider mite. But by then, majority of the melons had actually ripened, which was great. Now, that greenhouse is far too small for what I want to grow this year. It was very cramped in there, and it didn't help that I actually had volunteer tomato plants popping up in the soil in there, and I didn't remove them. So this year I want to give them plenty of space in the new polytunnel. So, like last year, I am going to grow the Emir. I really enjoyed eating this one. Now, this one is actually cold tolerant and it can actually be grown outdoors. How successful, I don't know. In fact, I may grow one outdoors as an experiment, try to find somewhere that's a bit of a sun trap to see if I can get this one to grow. But majority of them, probably 3 plants, will go into the actual polytunnel. Now, this is an incredibly sweet melon, and last year I really did enjoy having fresh melon. Coming down in the morning, picking it fresh and having that for my breakfast or a snack before my lunch. So I'm looking forward to growing the Emir again. Another one that I grew last year was the baby watermelon. Now, in this country, you're not going to be able to grow the giant watermelons that you see when you travel abroad. Those great big vast fields, and you see all those watermelons sitting on the ground. In general, you're not going to be able to do that here in the UK, but you can successfully grow the smaller version of that watermelon. Our summers, our warm weather is not long enough to get the amount of growing in that plant to grow really big fruits. But last year I managed to get watermelons about so big, and I think I had 4 or 5, but I did lose a few plants last year. But I think that was slug damage at the beginning, and I don't think my beds were that nutritious with everything that they needed long term in that greenhouse last year. So I'm going to try and rectify that this year in the polytunnel at least. But that's another great one to grow. Now, another one I'm going to grow, which I'm going to put the name up here because I butcher names left, right and centre. Now, this is supposed to be another good one to grow, and apparently again it's very sweet. I have not grown this one before, and this year is the first year of me growing it, but I'm actually looking forward to trialling this one. This one will definitely just be in the polytunnel because I'm actually not 100% sure whether this would be successful outdoors. But I really do want a little bit more variety in my melons this year. And my last melon that I'm growing is a Malaga, and this is an F1. Now, I wanted to grow this the other year, but I couldn't actually get the seed in time for me to sow. So these are going to get sowed too. Again, this will go into my polytunnel. Now, because we are in the UK, there is certain melons that definitely does a little bit better than some other melons. So it could be a little bit of trial and error to get the right melon to grow on your growing space, especially if you're trying to grow outdoors, because that really is dependent on our summer. Whereas 3-4 years ago, we had that incredibly hot summer for a long period. We haven't quite had the same since. So you never know what's going to happen. Whereas if I grow them in the polytunnel, I can mimic a longer season a little bit easier. When you're sowing these, I am sowing directly into these size pots. I'm not going to mess around with module trays and moving them around too much. They're going to go into this, and before they need to be removed from this or repotted on, they'll be in the ground anyway. So that's what I'm going to go for this year. Now, they do like a bit of warmth, and at the moment I've actually got them at home. But to be honest, I think this greenhouse probably gets warmer in the day and probably cooler at the night at the moment than it is actually at home. But we'll actually see how well they do. Now, I might give them a little bit of an additional heat with a little propagator cable wire that I've got lying around to give them some under-bottom heat just to get them germinated. But melons can be a lot slower to germinate than, say, the cucumbers or the squashes or things like that. So just have some patience. Planting them on their side is also good because it will help with water draining off them a little bit easier, and that should hopefully stop any rotting in the pot. And you want that soil moist but not sodding wet. So give it a really good water before you sow it, and then that should be enough until it starts sprouting at least. Now, for us, we will grow our melons up strings. Last year we did it in the greenhouse, and we had strings from the ground that go underneath the root ball, and then we trowel them up and then over the actual archway. Now, this worked quite well for us last year, and it's definitely something I want to do again. But the one thing that you do need to make sure is you're giving it a really good feed. It's really, really important. Now, there's lots of feeds out there, like I've mentioned in my previous videos. You've got the bloodfish bone, you've got the chicken manure pellets, you have got the comfrey tea, the nettle tea, anything like that, even good old-fashioned rotted manure. But they will take some feeding, so just bear that in mind. Now, one of the things with melons, when they are growing, they will flower. Now, some of those flowers will drop off because it's a failure to pollinate. But really, once they start pollinating and producing a good quality melon on that plant, you don't want more than 2, maybe 3 melons. Now, some varieties, you can get away with a couple more, but in general, you only want a handful of melons on each plant. If you allow it to produce, let's say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 melons, if it is actually going to produce that amount, it won't have enough time to put all that energy and strength to actually growing and ripening all those melons on that vine. So you are better off taking off the weaker melons and then letting the other ones produce. Now, on each melon plant, you are looking from anything from 1 or 2 fruits up to 4 or 5 fruits in general. But I also understand that some people manage to get a few more out of their growing space. But that's how much you're roughly looking at, give or take, depending on the variety. Now, melons are reasonably easy to grow, and as they are starting to set your flowers, you want to get rid of any side shoots so the melon plant can actually focus on growing and ripening that melon. Now, they're relatively easy to grow, but they do have a few little problems. You can get powdery mildew on your leaves, which will stop those leaves photosynthesizing, giving that plant the energy to carry on producing and ripening those melons. So that's something you need to be aware of. and also red spider mite. Now we got that towards the end of the season, so even though it did damage the plants and kill one or two off, I was actually able to pick the melons off of that plant and ripen them at home for a day or two. They were just slightly underripe. Now this year, because they're going to go into the polytunnel, it is going to be much more humid in that polytunnel. So hopefully that will reduce that spider mite, because spider mites like hot, dry conditions. They're not as keen in humid, hot conditions. But the downside to having a humid condition is powdery mildew. So it kind of swings and roundabouts. So you do need to find that little bit of a balance with your plants. Now there is pesticides and tonics that you can use. I've heard that garlic water works and things like that. I didn't find it works at all. But I was able to remove majority of the leaves that were damaged with the spider mite, and then that vastly reduced any damage further on that plant. So these are my melons. Well, these are two of my melons. Oh, and that smells absolutely beautiful. These are ready to harvest. The tendrils are dried. There's cracking along the top of the stem, and it's changed colour in just a couple of days. This one is not quite ready yet. More green. Tendrils are still wet too. So I'm going to leave that one on the plant. They're ready to ripen later on in the year, but they don't necessarily store as well as some of your other things. You can pop it into the fridge at home for a few days at least. I found that not being too much of an issue, but I always like to keep it on the counter for an hour or two before I actually ate it, because melon at room temperature tastes much sweeter than straight out of the fridge. So guys, what are you growing this year, melon wise? Is this going to be the first year that you're going to give it a go? Are you going to try growing outdoors or indoors? And have you ever had much success growing outdoors? I do actually think though it really is dependent on how our summers are, and you just never know with our summers. Let me know in the comments guys what you're intending on growing and how you're going to grow it, because I really do enjoy reading those comments.